And yet, here's something that I think we need to think about. Whenever we consider these possibilities, we need to constantly be mindful of the fact that we love to scare the hell out of ourselves.
Warning, this is not entertainment.
What you're about to hear is an episode that was very hastily put together. It's not very polished, so I apologize for that. I was working on this late at night a few nights ago and really just trying to capture some ideas in the moment. So not a whole lot of prep work in terms of outlining and kind of navigating a flow in terms of where we wanted to go in this episode. But I'm hoping that it gets to the point and to the core of what I'm hoping to accomplish. It's obviously not a small topic and not something that should probably be treated in a hasty way, so I apologize for that. And what it's really intended to do is be a primer for something that I would like to revisit later with a little bit more structure, clarity, and a little bit more well-rounded navigation through the various ins and outs of the components of it. But to get to the point, this is an episode around the concept of manifestation, or what we would call a theory of everything. Basically, an ideology or a philosophy that can explain all the nuance and seemingly contradictory things in the universe around us. What piqued my interest in this topic is, well, a few things. One, obviously, my interest in comparative religion and sociology and some of the things that, you get a sprinkling of in every episode of Eschaton, and, some of the contradictory nature of some of the stories and myths that we were raised on. But beyond that, I saw a 60 Minutes episode a few years back where this man who had a genius level IQ was interviewed, and he was asked whether or not he believed heaven was real. And without hesitation, he said yes. And when the interviewer asked him how he could be so sure, he said that he believed that anything that could be made or thought of in the human mind could be made real. And the reason was because we have the power to create. And it made me think back to the story in Genesis 1 of being created in the image of God. And what I believe more than anything else sets mankind apart in this world is our ability to create, the ability to create art, which is a reflection of our consciousness, our self-awareness, and basically our capacity to manifest things into the world. And that stuck with me because obviously it's true in the material sense, right? If you can picture it in your mind, you can make a physical representation of it, whether it be a machine, a robot, a piece of art, piece of music. We can manifest things like no other flesh and blood creature on earth can do. But this guy was talking about it in more of a metaphysical sense, which if you can imagine it in your mind, then it becomes a reality in a physical sense somewhere, in some esoteric, maybe immaterial way, but in a real sense, it becomes physical and present for you, if not for everyone. So that idea kind of sent me down this rabbit hole, and I learned recently about this book. It's no longer in print. It's called The Goblin Universe. A man by the name of Frederick William Holliday wrote this book in the last century. I think it came out in the early 90s. It's no longer in print, and you can find copies on Amazon, but it's like $100. It's really hard to get a copy of this book. But basically, he talks about this concept within the context of the supernatural or the paranormal. So he talks about UFOs, Bigfoot, all sorts of ET sightings and strange creatures and cryptids, the usual coast-to-coast George Norrie, Art Bell type topics. And he basically proposes a theory of everything in this book, The Goblin Universe, to make the case that these things can all exist without being contradictory to anything else. I won't go too much farther into detail than that, but otherwise I just want to say that's what I'm trying to get at in this episode. So this will sound maybe a little bit scatterbrained, and for that I apologize. This was recorded late at night, actually after wrapping up another podcast that we recently put out. So it did not have all of the polish, but I just felt in the moment that it was the right time to record it. So I hope you find some value in this, and if nothing else, that it just piques your interest. I highly recommend that you check out this concept of theory of everything, or a manifestation philosophy, which is basically this idea that we have the capacity in some sort of noetic or immaterial way to create things that are not real and thereby make them real. So in the beginning, God spoke. In the beginning, God said, let there be light. Genesis, the book of John. You see a theme there in both of those. The idea is to just manifest something from nothing, ex nihilo. Now we can argue whether or not in Genesis the earth is actually created ex nihilo from nothing. But in any case, the idea that we can think something in our mind and then make it a reality is a uniquely human trait reserved for humans and presumably our creators. But it doesn't end there. So without further ado, I want to jump into the episode. I just wanted to give this context so it didn't just sound like late night ramblings of a madman without any coherent structure. And if you guys find this topic interesting, we can revisit it later down the road. But again, the book, if you want to check it out, is called The Goblin Universe. And that might be a good starting point. If you can't get your hands on a copy of that, by all means, just do some digging on YouTube. There's other great books, specifically in the physics realm. It's weird because material science and physics is starting to dabble into this concept as well. But in any case, let me know your thoughts. And if you like this content, we can continue with themes and topics more aligned with this, maybe things like string theory, etc. Haven't gone down that avenue previously in the podcast. So this is really the first venture into this philosophical kind of merging with the scientific sort of space. But let me know what you think. And if you guys enjoy it, we can explore more of this. And I promise there will be more structure, research, and a more narrow scope of direction next time. So with that, thank you all for your support. If you could take a moment to go out to your podcasting platform of choice, wherever you're hearing this, and leave us a 5-star review, we'd greatly appreciate it. And tell somebody about the show. It really does more than anything else to help get the word out and grow our listener base. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon. What if all of the strangeness in the world that we see today, everything around us that we have such difficulty wrapping our minds around, what if it's all connected? What if there's this nice little packaged theory of everything metaphysical, everything paranormal, everything that leaves you scratching your head at night, all of the conspiracy theories you see scrolling across your thread on Facebook or on the news sites that you peruse? What if all of these things stem back to one single source? Sounds too convenient, right? Sounds like everything is just peripherally connected, but the picture's so big, all of the crazy nuances and stories and magical things that we seem to hear about in this world are so diverse that they can't all be connected, right? Well, some of you would say the opposite. Some of you would say, no, absolutely they are. And maybe you look at it through the lens of your religious worldview or through the lens of your skepticism even, where you say it's all just human fallacy, or it's all just part of the divine plan. But what if we could put something tangible around it? I don't know if you've caught it yet. It just came out the time you're hearing this, probably a few weeks ago. But a new documentary series on Showtime by J.J. Abrams called UFO. And no, I'm not going to talk about the UFO phenomena for the duration of this episode. It is an interesting documentary series, 4 parts, about an hour long each. It's interesting not because it provides so much in new or unfamiliar content for those of us who have been chasing this for years and listening to tales and accounts of UFO phenomena from those who have experienced it, whether they be pilots or celebrity contactees. You know those names by now. What's interesting about the documentary is that it touches into a realm that you almost never see these UFO type things go, because they've become sort of a religion unto themselves. Anybody who's ever seen an episode of Ancient Aliens knows what I'm talking about. There is really a religious type of fervor that's come up around this, and it's almost become its own ideology for the Star Wars type minded folks. But he talked about angels. In one episode at the end, I think it's episode 2, it's either episode 2 or 3, he starts talking about these UFOs, and it goes on like a 20-minute bend where you can see, like, okay, JJ, I see what you're trying to do here. He's trying to interject a fresh take on the UFO phenomena. And he starts talking about angels and angelic beings, sightings all the way back to recorded history. You know, you see them in artwork, these flying discs, Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, which I don't care what anybody says. I know Dr. Michael Heiser disagrees with me on this, but that's talking about some sort of UFO phenomena, no doubt about it. You see this all throughout history, over and over again. Why? Some of you might say, well, yeah, this is the Watchers, the fallen angels. We've been down this path before. Even on this podcast, we've talked about that before. But what if it's deeper than that? What if it's not angels per se? Because I think that even that terminology comes with a current zeitgeist of the time. Those who would frame it through the lens of angels are people who are observing it based on the world they know at that time, just like those of us today, for the most part, are framing it as extraterrestrials. But nonetheless, they seem to be similar representations, these light creatures, these light entities that come with a message. What I'm trying to say is, what if these angels, gods, aliens, whatever you want to call them, are not just the stories we were told in terms of the watchers that showed up here, fallen sons of God who came to earth and corrupted mankind, and some of them are still here today and left a legacy, and now they operate with shadow governments behind the scenes, or some of them might be peaceful and they're here to try to monitor our nuclear programs and keep an eye on us to promote world peace and make sure nobody sets off a nuke. Okay, maybe, but what if all of the evidence seems to suggest that these things go back even further than that? Our earliest recorded religions, our earliest recorded accounts of mankind interacting with these things, whether it be at Mount Hermon or in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, when Oannes came out of the sea, the fish god started teaching people how to read and write. What if it's something far more ancient? You see, this idea that we were seeded here by another civilization, maybe from light years away, maybe from our next door neighbor Mars, this idea is starting to pick up steam. It's one of those things that you could easily brush off, but there seems to be evidence based on what we've learned from the rover missions and what we've learned from the far outer reaches of pioneering spacecraft and the evidence that they've sent back in picture form, is that others have been down this same road we're on. Others have developed civilization. Maybe they were destroyed by natural disasters. Maybe they were destroyed because their star burned out. But what if, just entertain the idea for a second, and we'll use Mars for an example. What if Mars had habitable life on it 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago? And what if the technology on that planet was so developed at that time, the people who were on that planet, some of them were able to escape. Some of them were able to travel intergalactically, or maybe extra-dimensionally. And some of them might have come here. Some of them might still be with us below the surface of the sea. Others might have gone elsewhere, and maybe they come back from time to time. I've heard UFO stories. The ones that I find to be most interesting anyway are the ones of this nature, where people talk about the sky shaking almost like a sheet, and then a little bit of vibration, and then the object they saw in the sky is gone, as if to say that it's not the object that's moving, but space and time is actually tearing, and these objects are going through it and disappearing, so to speak. Well, that would account for a lot of things, right? Intergalactic time travel, maybe, or intergalactic space travel that would allow for some sort of teleportation. Or what if these things are us from the future? What if they've come back from some point in the distant future to observe us or to try to alter the course of history? I don't know. Maybe that's just on my mind because of the Marvel movies or some modern superhero type thing, because that's what it sounds like. I don't know. These are all viable options, right? Things that we can only armchair philosophize over at the moment. But do you remember those questions you used to ask yourself when you were a kid? The things you weren't afraid to ask before you were indoctrinated by your parents or by the school? Well, if God created us, who created God? Well, if God is a man, well, did God have a wife? Could there be another race of people just like us in another galaxy somewhere? Or what if we fall asleep in this world, we wake up in another one? What if when we die, we come back to life in another one? Or like the Matrix, what if we all are just plugged in and we're just being farmed right now and our consciousness is projecting here, but we're actually in a little 8x6 tube somewhere? Heaven forbid, right? But what if? All right, now before I lose you, you're going to say, well, what are you talking about, Josh? You're just throwing out a whole bunch of possibilities, and that's just going to frustrate people because there's nowhere to go with it, right? Well, here it is. What if the theory of everything is this? What if consciousness is the only reality? What if you can make something real just by thinking about it, envisioning it, imagining it, believing it to be true? What if the greatest thing and the most powerful thing in this universe is our own consciousness and we don't even realize it? Maybe all of these things are true at one place, at one point in time in the universe, all at once. You see, I think there's evidence to suggest that if we have the ability to imagine something in our consciousness that we can actually manifest it into reality. And that is why so many of these things, so many of these experiences we hear about are so real for some and so foreign to others. Why is it when one man dies, he sees a vision of Christ, and when another man dies, he sees a vision of the prophet? Why is it when one man dies, he believes that he is absorbed into the light, a warm light that embraces him, while another has no recollection whatsoever? It's just nothingness, not even a darkness, but a nothingness. Why is it that when thousands of people began to hear about Roswell in 1947, that all of a sudden there's thousands upon thousands of cases of UFO sightings? And then when the Barney and Betty Hill story breaks, abduction stories come out the wazoo. Why is it? Is it because these people are just piggybacking off one another, making it up? Well, I've seen many credible people myself who have told some fantastical stories that I don't believe they're making up. What if the theory of everything is that everything that we can imagine in our own mind, in our own consciousness, can be seeded into the visible world? Quantum mechanics is starting to touch on to some interesting things that I think hint in this direction, guys. And I think that what I'm talking about now is going to be common knowledge in the not too distant future. That if you can imagine something, that you can materialize it. I remember hearing stories when I was a kid, 18, 19 years old. Canandaigua Lake, New York. Canandaigua is a native term for the chosen spot. I believe it was the Seneca people or another Iroquois tribe who coined that phrase, but Canandaigua nonetheless was popular for UFO sightings. People say they could channel them. They would signal them with lighters. They would just meditate, and these things would just appear over the lake in the hills. People would go out in groups, and many of them would claim that they would see these strange lights in the sky. Well, why is that? Are these things like dogs that come at your beck and call? Doesn't seem to be that way for me. But these people talked about being so intent, so focused. They believed so much. And what did Jesus say? When you have belief, you can move mountains, right? Nothing is impossible for you. Well, I wonder if that applies to manifesting reality. Maybe you make these things appear. Maybe you create your own afterlife. You create your own manufactured experience of what comes next. Do you know what the implications of that would mean? It would mean, like the book of Psalms says, that we are all gods. We all have the creative power of a god. You know, the Mormons kind of touch on this. They believe that when you die, you sort of become your own creator. You create your own universe, so to speak. And I don't want to butcher Mormon theology because I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I know that they do believe something like that. And I don't think it's a foreign idea. I actually think there's a lot of truth to it. I think you could even gather it from the words of many of the great religious teachers. Jesus himself, says, does the scripture not say that you are gods? Well, that's what he's referencing, a verse in the Psalms that says that we are like the gods. I think this is what the Bible references, by the way, to be created in the image or the likeness of God. I think it's a reference to hierarchy. We serve like God over this world as God serves over all of creation. And one day, I believe that we may serve over all of our own creation. Maybe that's where God came from, to get back to my previous question, the infantile question of, if God made us, who made God? Maybe, and it's blasphemous to some of you for me to say this, but so be it, maybe God was once like us. Maybe he grew up, he died, and when he got to manifest his own reality, he manifested this, and you and I are living in it. How about that? This theory of everything would account for all the strange phenomena, all the paranormal, all the unexplained, and all the strangeness in the world that we can't seem to account for. If the power of the mind, especially group consciousness, which in experiments around hypnosis, psychosis, the military was doing studies on these things in the 60s, 70s. I'm sure they're still doing it now, but up to the modern time, at least till the 80s or 90s, we have documented record that they were studying some of these things, whether it be the Philadelphia experiment or if you saw the book or saw the film or read the book, The Men Who Stare at Goats. They were doing this in Desert Storm as well. They were trying to use hypnosis and psychosis to basically make super soldiers. But what they learned along the way is that the power of the mind is unlimited. We've only scratched the surface of the deep blue sea that is human consciousness. But even in those surface scratches, we have found amazing things, which is that under the right conditions, humans can manipulate their reality. There was a show that came out a few years ago. I didn't watch it, but somewhat am exposed to the premise of it, called American Gods. And basically, in short, the gods need people to believe in them in order to survive. And if people stop believing, then the gods die. Well, this isn't too far from this theory of everything that I'm talking about right now. This idea that we manifest reality through the most powerful thing in the universe, which is our own consciousness. So the Greek gods, Zeus, Ares, Apollo, these guys all existed at one time because people believed in them and manifested them into reality. Now, you know that in previous episodes, I've talked about how these people, actually were heroes or warlords on earth who, when they died, became revered and ultimately worshipped as gods, and the religious imagery was built up around them. And there may be some truth to that, but it also could be simultaneously true that because people started believing in them as gods, that they actually manifested as gods into reality. Let there be light. God spoke and it became so. Well, if we're like God, can't we speak and make it so? I say to you, truly, if you tell this mountain, be cast into the sea, it will do so. Can we manifest reality with true faith? See, I'm leaning toward the idea that this is a yes, a resounding yes. And if so, then all these things were true. Those gods did live because those people believed it in mass. When Christianity swept through and the majority of people stopped believing in the Greco-Roman gods, maybe they ceased to exist. Maybe they died. Nietzsche, maybe he was onto something when he said, God is dead, we killed him. Well, maybe in our modern secular world, with the rise of atheism and agnosticism and materialism, maybe we killed God. Maybe the idea of God that existed for 2,000 years in the post-pantheistic religiosity of the Hellenistic era, maybe our God died as well because people stopped believing. And maybe now we're manifesting new realities. Maybe the ET, the Greys, the extraterrestrial sightings are all a manifestation of reality that we imagine into existence. A lot of people who have seen some of these UFOs and these flying Vimanas or whatever you would want to call them, these crafts, is that they seem to be controlled by thought. They move so fast, they move without mechanical propulsion, that they seem to be controlled by a fleeting thought. You know how quickly a thought can pass through your mind. That's how these things seem to move. I don't think that's a coincidence. What if what we're seeing in the skies, these entities, these creatures, these crafts, are controlled by thought because they're being manifested in real time? What if somebody, somewhere, is manifesting this into existence and then controlling the reality of it in an instant? Or what if they are coming from another galaxy or another place in the universe or traveling through some portal, but they've manipulated and mastered this idea of pure consciousness, this idea of controlling the material world through telekinesis or through psychosis, and therefore they can move themselves and their crafts with just a thought. And that's why our quote-unquote modern technology can't even keep up with it. See, I believe that in the not-too-distant future, we're going to experience a breakthrough in understanding that's going to make this a reality. And people will look back and say, oh, wow, why didn't we catch this sooner? Why didn't we learn this sooner? And the reason being is because we're focused solely on material capability. And our material capabilities have severe limitations. But man is not created solely as a material being. He is spirit more than anything else. And because of our spirit, our mind, body, consciousness trichotomy, when all those things work together, you get the divine triangle, and that divine triangle makes all the possibilities limitless. The all-seeing eye, the pyramid, you see it in imagery all around us, but it's that trichotomy, mind, body, spirit. When we focus on the other two and shift away from the materialism that we've been overemphasizing for so long, that's when we'll take the next step in technological advancement. That's when we'll make the leap into interstellar travel and into the next level of human consciousness. This is my theory of everything, that all things are connected through a singular consciousness, the divine/human consciousness. If you can dream it, you can manifest it. And if you can manifest it, then the possibilities for the material, observable world are endless. This is how two seemingly opposing ideas, two contradictory things can both be true at the same time. It's by the power of will and manifestation. Look to the phenomena in the observable world, the paranormal phenomena that can otherwise not be explained. And then after all of that, look to yourself. Look to your own consciousness. Focus on what you can manifest and what you can control, and tell me if it doesn't come true. I've seen in my own life how I can meditate and focus and consciously think of a thought, an idea, a goal. We call it goal setting, but it's much deeper than that for me. I've seen how those things can manifest into reality. Eerily so. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that we just have not tapped into the true power of what rests within our own skulls, within our own souls as well, and ultimately our own bodies. The divine trichotomy, mind, body, and spirit, is the key to unlocking the theory of everything. If you can dream it, you can make it a reality. And if you can do that, just imagine what lies beyond the doors of perception. That means whatever your vision of heaven is or the afterlife, you can manifest it. If you believe that you're reincarnated and born again in this life, you can manifest that. If you believe that nothing happens and you just simply cease to exist, you can manifest that. Manifestation via the power of the consciousness, that is how you get the attention of the gods, because you can manifest them. You can manifest all things. Remember when Daniel was praying in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, and it says that in his fervor, in his meditation, and in his intense prayer, the angel Michael finally appeared to him. It said, Daniel, because of your prayer, I heard you. I was trying to get to you. Well, he believed. Daniel believed so fervently that it became an irresistible pull for Michael. I think this is just a small metaphor, a small example of the things that we're capable of when we truly, devotedly believe in anything. This is what Jesus would call the faith of a mustard seed, a faith that unfortunately most of us don't have because we look in the wrong direction for it and we misinterpret it. But that mustard seed lays in the ocean that is your consciousness. And if you can tap into it, you can manifest your own reality that is truly and utterly limitless. A theory on reality that accounts for all things.